So Appleton is a Pokemon that, through Generation 8, hasn't exactly been known for its great viability in competitive Pokemon. At the very beginning, before Pokemon Home's release had affected lower tiers, before we had DLC, yeah, Appleton was actually banned from PU because turns out a tier without any real steel types and a mon that can very easily just run choice specs and blast through anything that doesn't resist its very strong Draco Meteor is very good. But once that early developmental metagame passed, it never really found a spot in any sort of tier. But this generation in NU, Appleton is one of our best Pokemon, and I'm going to talk about how that came to be. Amon going from trash to treasure, unlike Avalugg. If you've been enjoying the content, of course, make sure to subscribe if you're not already subscribed. Leave a like, leave a comment. Join as a member, you get more content. It's a great deal. So, if we want to talk about Appleton, I first want to mention specially defensive, because this set doesn't see a ton of use anymore. Although it's definitely what we saw Appleton use a lot in the earlier stages of NU this gen. The idea, of course, is simple. This mon is an incredible team disruptor. Apple Acid special defense drops mean that you think about a lot of bulky mons that maybe switch into Appleton, they don't really keep up as well versus it. You know, Coiled to Dunsparce, for example, or Bulk Up Ursaring. These Pokemon don't end up actually being that great of answers because with Terra Steel, you don't lose to them. You spam Apple Acid, they can't boost to a point where they actually threaten to beat you, and throw your Leech Seed on them at some point, you're just happy to keep attacking them. It's one of those instances where you're a phaser that doesn't actually care about the Terra Fairy at all because, well, what's the point? I don't need to care about phasing you. I beat you without having to force you out. Contrast it with, say, a Pokemon like Assault Vest Electros. If you're using that as a panic check, well, that's not going to work at all. And, you know, unless you have Acid Spray, which, admittedly, a decent amount of them used to have, but you're just nowhere near as bulky overall, and as a result, you're not nearly as good of a check. I would say this set kind of started to fall off, though, as a result of a couple things. One of them being Lurantis' rise. Just having another bulky grass type that does a bit more for your overall team utility definitely put a bit of a damper on Appleton's potential, as well as more special attackers just seemingly being better into Appleton. I mean, if we think about the common ones that we've had lately, you have Terra Fairy Mesprit, which, again, kind of a point of, alright, well, Appleton doesn't really lose to it. It's just still kind of a rough matchup, because if Mesprit's Terra Steel with Substitute setup, it's very, very dicey very quickly, in addition to offensive sets running Trick. You talk about Jolteon, which, okay, well, Terra Ice kind of just beat down Appleton, and you force these very awkward plays between, alright, well, do I go for my Terra and then try to, you know, resist the Terra Blast? But okay, what if they Volt Switch? Do I stay as a Grass Dragon? It was just a very bad interaction for Appleton. And then other ones are like Oricorio, which started running Terra Fairy and has just Taunt to make you literally never beat it, because it's going to spam Quiver Dance, it's going to boost to +6, and you're not going to be able to lower its defenses enough to where you actually threaten it. So how has Appleton managed to stay relevant? Well, we turned to offensive sets. What did I mention about it in PU last generation? Well, it was banned at a point because offensive sets were actually pretty good. It turns out, even in NU, where we have a bit higher of a power level at this point than it did when it was banned from PU, Specs is still a set that was able to have some success. Because the best steel type in this format is like, what, Magneton? Berserker? I mean, it's Magneton, but Berserker's the other one. Neither of them take hits from Specs Appleton. Offensive Appleton in general, they don't take these hits from. And so, people started running Choice Specs because it's still pretty bulky. You look at the stats here. The HP is carrying a bit, but you're able to still switch into foes like, say, Sandaconda, Vaporeon when it was in the meta, and you didn't really care about its scouting because, okay, I'm so strong anyway and I have Apple Acid. I can start really punishing whatever switches in anyhow. And hey, maybe it's not going to be able to take me on. You talk about a mon like Chansey, well, hey, you better not be taking too much chip on that switch in. You better hope I don't have my hazards, because I'm going to Apple Acid you, and I'm going to just slowly start beating you down. You also had a very safe move to spam out too, Dragon Pulse or Giga Drain. You know, of course, Dragon Pulse more reliable than Draco, because no drops, it can't miss. Whereas with Giga Drain, it was just a nice way for Appleton to stave off that chip that maybe it's taking from, say, Sandaconda Earthquakes, Vaporeon Surf, or other just resisted hits that could rack up damage, and it ended up making it a little bit more sturdy into injury hazards as well, because you were just going to be able to get your health back on switch-ins from, say, like an Assault Vest Electros, or an Eviolite Ursaring, or even like a Coiled to Dunsparce back then. And this set was able to keep Appleton at a pretty good spot for a while. It never really broke past the A- rank, though, or maybe even B+. And I think the big limiter to the set was still, as a wall breaker, like, it looks a little awkward, right? I'm running max speed here. The fact remains that with Specs Appleton, it was often better to get a little bit more speed because you wanted to outrun other bulky Pokemon. Think about it like this, right? I'd much rather be able to outrun foes like Electros, like Uninvested Dunsparce, like even Lurantis. I mean, if it's Terra Ice randomly, that could be a little bit dire, you know? You don't want to get outplayed by them if you get too low. It was viewed as more beneficial to get the jump on those mons than it was to, say, have some bulk. And I don't know, I guess take 2 or 3% less from Sandaconda EQ. It's definitely a better roll than that, but you're still not taking much. It just didn't affect notable damage rolls to the point that you wanted to compromise on your speed. And while you could, maybe you could have run less speed. With how good Specs Appleton was, at least in my opinion at the time, having that advantage in the mirror matchup was a bit more valuable than the bulk. But now we don't see as much Specs. And I think a big reason for that is, of course, Blissey, but also the prevalence of Terra Fairy setup sweepers. I mentioned the Dunsparce, of course, is one. Ursaring has been another. It just makes spamming out Draco a lot harder when you've got these Pokemon, as well as, say, Oricorio. Sandaconda even can be Terra Fairy. And you don't want to give some of these very dynamic setup sweepers free turns to boost because, yeah, they take over games very, very quickly and pretty easily. So once a set that started getting run, that was still very, very good offensively and also kind of, adjusted for meta trends. Appleton, I'm eject because that's how this set makes me feel. Pause. Eject Pack Appleton is something that we saw, I believe, in the early stages of NUPL this year, so around June time. This set started, probably late May. This set started getting usage though because, again, you still capitalize on Appleton's great offensive potential in a tier with no really good natural bulky steel types. You have Draco Meteor still, you still have Apple Acid, so you're breaking past these special walls that, may still be tasked with trying to check Appleton. And then, the biggest seller, of course, is Recycle Draco Meteor. Because you can keep pivoting versus Pokemon that you literally are never breaking. So something like a Blissey, I'm here to tell you right now, we're not breaking that. You might be able to trade with it and get it low, because, Appleton has a lot of natural HP, so you're going to withstand a good amount of Seismics, and if you keep spamming Apple Acid, hey, maybe you leave it at under half after the exchange. You're not beating it, though. You're probably not, at least. But you're able to still keep up momentum, and it ends up giving Appleton a much better time in a metagame that has gotten increasingly offensive. You either run like bulky offense or hyper offense, it feels like, in this metagame if you really want to have success. And Appleton, at times, I feel with these slower paced sets, can end up struggling because you just can't keep up with the opposing team. It's very easy to get switched on, get pivoted on by foes like, say, Rotom, even Electros if you're trying to get fancy. And then you just give up a lot of momentum to foes like Toxicroak or Hisuian Sneasel. I would say Oricorio, but that's not in the format anymore. And you don't want to do that. So this set allows you to get a very nice blend of the previous two ones. You have all the offensive potential of Specs, just about. You have a lot of the utility still of Special Defensive Appleton. But you also gain a new tool, Pivoting. Blissey? I don't care. I'm the one getting momentum on you, son. It's just a very, very cool trade-off. And you don't really lose power. It's not notable power. You're not going to OHKO as many things, sure, but you don't need to. Your Draco's still going to take them down to very, very low health. And having the ability to use this is a bit better of a check into certain foes, especially when you take Terra Steel into account, is quite useful. That's gonna be it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed this. I think it's very cool to see Appleton, another mon like, say, Cacturn. Although Cacturn's been really good in Inu before, so maybe that's not the best example. If we want to talk about, like, mons that weren't good in Inu ever before this generation, I think probably the most apt comparison would be, say, Lurantis. Because Lurantis was released in Gen 7, and it never really had a spot in Inu. Because even with Contrary, and it had superpower back then, who cared? There was just so many better options, and it's just not a very potent mon anyway. So it's always cool when we see these generational shifts that actually do end up causing formerly terrible Pokemon to become, hey, respectable threats out of nowhere. But as I mentioned, I'm rambling a little bit too much. I hope you all enjoyed this. Shout out to Appleton. Use this Pokemon if you haven't already. I will see you in the next video. Peace.